To another episode of Bills Talk Live with Matt Parrino and Ryan Talbot. It is 7:00 on Wednesday. You are on YouTube, where we are going to be every week, all the time. There's no end in sight. And tonight we have a very special show lined up for you guys. A couple of really great guests. Well, one great guest, and then the sports director of Channel 4, Josh Reed.
I wondered which one he was going to say was great.
Well, thunder and lightning's here, so don't you boys worry. All right.
Yeah, if you don't realize who that is on the bottom right hand corner, that is Nate Geary of WGR 550, host of the pre and post game show every Bills Sunday. And that mustache, I must say, my friend, it is legend. It's quickly becoming legendary.
Yeah, so I've been trimming it in this area, so it did start to go over the lip. So I did eventually start to get in there with like my girlfriend's mini scissors, those little ones. Okay. So I've been primping and keeping it 100, as the kids would say. So, but I'll tell you what, this is the second time in like 5 days I've been on one of these with Josh Reed, and I think it's too much at this point.
It is entirely too much.
Listen, I gotta say, Josh answered the question for us. Nate, when we first tweeted this out, he said, better hair, Josh Reed or Nate Geary? Well, Josh came on the show in a hat tonight, so I think the question has been answered. Okay. The question has been answered. Show it off a little bit.
I was intimidated. I also just came back from a run, so I
look at you getting it in. My man Ryan, how you doing over there?
Hey, doing great, guys.
All right, so we are 4 days removed from the 2020 NFL Draft. The Buffalo Bills went out and kind of put the finishing touches, or just about that, on their 2020 roster. I think with the addition of Brian Cox Jr. today, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, we're sitting at about 88 players on the roster. So still some more work for Brandon Beane to do, and as we all know, the tinkering never finishes. But I wanted to start off the show today with a topic that I think is very interesting, and I'd like to get both of your guys, analysis on this. We'll start with Josh. If you go back to, that Houston weekend, when the Bills lost in Houston, the playoff game, the immediate aftermath, and as you started putting together your plans for, the Bills offseason, okay, I'd like them to add this player. I'd like them to do this at this position. Compare that to where we are now with what the Bills actually did, and where do those two things meet for you?
Well, I'd say the biggest box they checked was Stephon Diggs. I think everybody kind of felt that way. My second one was Quentin Spain. I thought Quentin Spain was a very, very big piece of what that offensive line was able to do last season. They bring him back, so they keep the continuity up front along the offensive line, and they add Stephon Diggs. Then everything else was kind of gravy after that. I wasn't entirely sure there was a whole lot more. When you start talking about adding a second receiver to go along with Devin Singletary, that tells me that the holes aren't gaping. Mm-hmm. The things that you have to add aren't enormous lifts. So I think that, when we left Houston after that game, the thought was got to get a number one, a true legit number one receiver for Josh Allen, and Brandon Beane did that. So I think this offseason has been another really good one from Brandon Beane.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to look at particularly the Stephon Diggs move and say, talk about home run, and in particular, I think in a year where I know most NFL GMs were probably biting their fingernails down to the nubs, wondering, am I going to get this rookie anytime before the month of September to be able to get in front of my coaches, have rookie mini camp, what's that's going to be like, I think played a big factor in a lot of people's drafts. And I think a guy, that's why you saw a guy like Jake Fromm maybe drop, but I know that's why you saw a guy like Bryce Hall for the New York Jets that ended up that's why he fell. The medicals, you couldn't have these teams get one-on-one interviews and medical reviews of these players. I think it really hurt a lot of prospects in this draft. But I think, to Josh's point, the Quentin Spain move to me stands out, maybe not from a retention standpoint, but how good that contract in hindsight is going to look for the next several years, because he's the 32nd overall paid starting offensive guard in football, which is just insane, because I think we could all agree he's probably somewhere within the top 15 or 20. So, I mean, tremendous value on the starting for your starting left guard this year, and how the right side plays out will be really interesting. I liked the Darrell Williams move. I know not everyone was in love with it. A lot of people go back to his 2019 season and say, well, what do we have here? But I think to Brandon Beane's point is he's going to get to go back to playing on the right side where I think he definitely belongs. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up pushing, Ty and Secchi at right tackle. Depends if he wants to play right guard. And maybe he's pushing Spencer Long. So I think that, again, Brandon Beane, his mantra, creating as much competition along that offensive line as possible. And I just did a piece this week at WGR550.com that I truly think this is one of the most versatile defensive lines in football. So we know their mantra is building from the lines, from the trenches out. They've certainly done that here this offseason.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry about that. Nate, I'm glad you kind of mentioned some of those names, Darrell Williams and Addison, Josh Norman, Jefferson, even Tywan Jones. The list goes on and on. EJ Gaines. How important is it in both of your opinions to bring in these guys that are familiar with the system, whether it's time in Carolina, time spent in Buffalo, like Tywan Jones and EJ Gaines? This is a team that's right on the cusp of possibly making a run in the AFC. And with this shortened offseason, what did you guys think about bringing in all those familiar faces that Brendan Beane and Sean McDermott that they knew so well, and Dan Morgan, because Dan Morgan had that relationship with Quentin Jefferson?
I'll give it to the senior. He can go first.
And they bring in the defensive line coach, Washington, obviously from Carolina, who's very familiar with all of these guys. They bring in Brian Cox Jr., who worked with Washington. I mean, it's continuity. Nate kind of touched on this a little bit. Rookies are really going to be behind the eight ball. Speaking of plug in your own web stories, I wrote a web story on how tough it's going to be for these rookies to come in. I mean, you're talking about a draft class that was selected virtually, and now they begin their NFL journey online. I mean, it's nothing that has ever happened, and knock on wood, quite frankly, hopefully it never does again. But they're going to learn the game, at least initially, in a way that no other rookie draft class has ever been asked to learn it. They're going to have to learn a playbook online, and how do you do physical stuff? I mean, I guess they're going to try to figure that out, running through some types of formations and stuff. Now, with the ingenuity around the NFL, they'll probably figure it out somehow. They'll probably figure out how to make guys learn formations and stuff like that and react, like this. Just, I'm sure there's some sort of app that they're coming up with already. But I to your point, I think that the Bills did a nice job. Brandon Beane went with a lot more veterans over younger guys because those veterans, they know what it takes to get ready for an NFL season.
Yeah, and the depth point, again, I think is going to be more important. I don't want to dwell on the fact that we are just in this weird, unprecedented time, but a lot of this thing is the reason why you're going to see so many different steps taken, precautions taken. I would really hope that you're a team that has a lot of depth. They're going to get, I think, 2 extra roster spots this year to 55. Is that correct? So those 2 extra roster spots are going to play and loom large, I think, for the 2020 season. In my opinion, I think you're going to see teams with far more injury issues this year than in years past. The Bills were one of the healthiest teams in football last season. I wouldn't bet on that for a 3rd season in a row. I think 2 years in a row, this organization has had really, really good luck with injuries. So for me, it's like, at the end of the day, teams without depth and depth that can step in, understand the system, those teams are going to have a leg up throughout this entire offseason process. And I think that's why the Bills decided, let's go get guys who can understand, that know the verbiage. It's not like we're talking about rocket science with Sean McDermott's defense. It's not like Rex Ryan, where everything was just, overly complicated and verbiated. We're talking about a simpler system, of course. But I think at the end of the day, they want guys that they can trust can execute in positions they know they can execute in. That's why Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are comfortable with the Mario Addisons of the world, right? These players that can come in, know the system, know what's expected of them, the quote unquote process, right? All of those things, sort of those boxes checked. So yeah, I think this is such a unique offseason. I would really, really want to be the team that feels it in a really good place from number 1 on my roster all the way down to 53 or 55, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, all good stuff. I think, I reached out to the Bills today to confirm, because Brandon was talking about it on Saturday night about, the coach is trying to figure out a way to get into some formation work. And the quote kind of read back to me kind of funny, like they're not going to be meeting right at the facility, and they're not. I mean, this is going to be a virtual rookie mini camp. So it's unprecedented. It's a difficult time for everybody. Obviously people in sports, it's tough, but we're living in a world today that, my kids can't even go to the park and play on the swings. And so we're kind of all trying to figure out a way to best move forward. And I think that to both of your points, the fact that the continuity is there, not only within the coaching staff, but within the organization, the front office, knowing guys, like even a guy like Brian Cox today, there's a familiarity that Brandon Beane can go call Mario Addison on the phone or Verdon Butler on the phone and say, okay, I'm looking at Brian Cox. What can you tell me about him? And then we talked to Brian tonight, and he says that Mario Addison was a guy that really was kind of like a role model to him in Carolina. So all those things, really good points. If you're joining us for the first time, I'm Matt Parrino, top right, Ryan Talbot. We are nyupinsyracuse.com on the bottom. Far left, Josh Reed of WIVB, Nate Geary on the right, WGR 550. If you have any questions, leave them in the chat room. We will get to them throughout the course of the show. But I wanted to move next to the draft a little bit here and talk about, just your reactions now a couple days removed. We've had a chance to digest this thing. And it's funny, you look at the top of the draft here, and for the Bills, it was the second and third round picks. And I wanted to ask you, would you have gone a different way than the Bills drafted at both of those spots? And that could go in a couple ways, because if you were high on some of these running backs, maybe you would have thought about going running back at 54. If you were high on a cornerback, maybe going cornerback in the third round. The more I look at this draft, though, and more I look at what happened and transpired after the Bills picked, I think that they picked who I would have taken at 54. Where do you guys land on that? All right, both spots.
I mean, I feel that way. I will pound the table for the AJ Epinesa pick. I think it was from a value perspective, from a need, from a scheme fit perspective. It checked all the boxes for me. And it was a guy that I don't think anybody would have batted an eye if the Bills hadn't made the Stephon Diggs trade and took Epinesa at 22. I don't think anybody would have said, holy cow, what a reach. That's a second round pick. I think for the most part, most people expected him to go somewhere between 20 and 35. That didn't happen, and he continued to fall. And I think, when you're Brandon Beane and you're a guy that wheels and deals, frankly, and he's sort of admitted it himself. He is a wheeler and dealer. And I imagine it was very difficult to sit on his hands at 45, 50, seeing AJ Epinesa on the board, probably thinking to himself, I would love it if he falls at 54. I'm not going to guarantee it, but for him not to move up, stay put, let the board continue falling his way. He got tremendous value, didn't give up any assets to do it. And for the third round pick was Zach Moss. I really love it from, again, a fit perspective. I like, although I think they have similar skill sets, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. I think they win in some similar ways. Having said that, I think I might make the argument that I look at Zach Moss as I wouldn't necessarily pencil in. I wouldn't pencil in Devin Singletary as your day one going to be bell cow starter, because I do think Zach Moss's running style, I think that they liked that last year. That's why you saw Frank Gore get as many touches as he did, even though he wasn't having the success he was having earlier in the season, because I think they like that north-south downhill runner. And although I would say Devin Singletary is definitely more slippery than Moss is. Moss is I loved his quote, the making defenders make business decisions. I mean, I think that's like the best quote maybe of all time. And because that's what it looks like on film. It looks like he's putting guys in situations where it's like, do I want to go one-on-one with this guy? And most cases, he's going to win. So, I really like both picks a lot. I think from a value perspective, maybe you make the case J.K. Dobbins is the guy you really, really wanted in the second. I don't think there's much of a drop-off from Dobbins and Zach Moss. And to be honest, I like Moss's fit in the offense.
I'm with you. With the Zach Moss quote, incredible. Great quote.
Amazing. Yeah.
Now, the problem is in the NFL is going to be a little different than Utah, because they're going to lay their
Pac-12. It is the Pac-12
on his
anymore.
chest after they ring him up. They will lay their business card on Zach Moss's chest after they ring him up the first time and welcome him to the league. Epinesa, home run. I mean, Nate said everything you need to know. I actually had a chance to talk to Jay Neiman, the assistant defensive line coach at Iowa, and Kelvin Bell, the defensive line coach at Iowa. Both had just nothing but great things to say about Epinesa. I thought one of the interesting things that I took from my conversation with each guy was that AJ is one of those people that when he showed up at Iowa, he was very much there were a lot of upperclassmen ahead of him, and he listened, and he didn't speak up a lot, and he kind of just soaked it all in, and he was a sponge. And then as he got older, he became that guy for the younger guys. And both coaches were like, I fully would expect to see that in Buffalo from him. Is he's going to take what Jerry Hughes has to tell him, and he's going to take what Trent Murphy has to tell him, and Mario Addison. He's going to take all that knowledge, use it, and then as he gets older, he'll step into that leadership role. So I was kind of like to hear that. The Zach Moss pick, there were so many running backs that I liked in this draft. And I'm with you. When you go back and look at the way the draft board fell and the way it all played out, it's not like there were 3 running backs that went after Moss that I went, oh man, I wish they could have had, I would prefer that guy. Mm-hmm. I would have really liked to have seen him try to use some of those picks that they ended up using on a kicker to move up. Oh. Maybe to move up and get.
I like the kicker move. I think that was the best pick of the draft. I'm not even kidding. I loved that pick. That is a confident pick.
That you like that pick better than Epinesa.
I love it. I love it.
So let me ask you this then about the kicker pick. Where do you land on your confidence level that he's going to make the roster? And I ask that because he's going against, obviously a trusted veteran who has had little spurts of inconsistency over the course of his career. But for a 2020 season where the Bills are going into this, let's be honest, at this point, without a big move at quarterback by the Patriots, the odds-on favorite to win the AFC East in most people's minds, maybe not in Vegas yet, but most people's minds. Can you trust a rookie kicker, even if he's the best kicker in the class, to go into 2020 that he's going to win that job? No doubt about it. Josh is shaking his head.
No way. There is no way. And I know Hauschka, has been up and down, but he got pretty hot toward the end of the year. And he made a lot of big kicks toward the end of the year. So I don't know. He was, to be honest with you, this is what happens when you get old. You start forgetting things. But what was he during the playoff game, during the wild card game? He knocked in a couple.
He certainly did, but that's not what I think about with the wild card game. You know what I think about in the wild card game is they decided a 49-yard field goal was too long to put their kicker out there in a playoff game that was close at the end. Like, to me, that was the white flag, right? Like, I thought that's
a good point.
I was like, wow. Their quarterback has had a mental just collapse here, and you're in a position to kick a field and you don't do it. To me, 49 yards is 10 out of 10. My kicker is going on the field to kick that kick in the NFL. I think that he has shown that his leg is definitely starting to lose that ability to hit those deep. And again, I don't want to say in the NFL that 50 to 52 isn't necessarily like we're not talking about, the Pac-12. We're not talking about the MAC conference here. We're talking about the best of the best. And I think you should be able to, feel confident that your kicker is strong enough leg-wise to kick in 55, 50 plus. And right now, I don't think they have that confidence. So I would say, as much as I agree with your point, Josh, that rookie kickers just, for me, that is the mental part, the mental aspect of the game. It's so difficult for these rookie kickers. And you could be the best rookie. We saw it with Roberto Aguero from Florida State. I mean, the highest picked kicker ever in the NFL draft just couldn't get off the bus. So, I mean, there is precedent for it. But I think when you look at what this kid does well, he can boom the football. I think day one, if Corey Bojorquez is in the plans for this 2020 season, I would watch Kari Vedvik. I would do it because I think he's going to push for that punting position. Now, if Vedvik makes the roster, I expect him to handle kickoff duties. Now, if Bojorquez makes the roster over Vedvik, to me, that opens the door for Tyler Bass to make the team because I think he is your kickoff specialist. He's going to be able to get touchbacks. Hauschka at times last year struggled in some of these in the windier conditions in December. So I can't believe we just dedicated 5 minutes to the rookie kicker. But that is the type of content you would come to expect with both me and Reed on a call like this. So,
hey, real quick, one last thought. I got to say this. But to me, this offense now should be better where the 3 points. Now you're going to score touchdowns. That should be the thought. And to me, I want maybe if Hauschka's more accurate versus the younger guy with the bigger leg, I probably take the accuracy from 40 in versus the bigger leg, because my thought is the Bills are going to score more touchdowns this year. They're going to be in the end zone more. Yeah, right. Touche.
No, definitely. And I think that, Ryan and I had this conversation last night. We put out our 53-man way too early roster projection. And, this was, I had Hauschka, he had Bass, and it's a fun conversation to have, because I think, to Nate's point, these kinds of moves, the Jake Fromm move, the Tyler Bass move, these are the kind of moves that only good teams and good franchises can make. Bad teams don't draft kickers, because you don't have that luxury. And so if you see a guy that you like, and this is something that I talked about before the draft even got here, the Senior Bowl was going to play this year more than it had in any year in the past, because that was where you really got a chance to dive in on some of these prospects. And, who knows? I mean, I actually, it's funny. We talked to Brandon a couple times now, and we didn't ask him about if that relationship started at the Senior Bowl. But I would guess that they were able to take a look at him down in Mobile and say, okay, we like what he's made up. And you could just tell he seems like a Brandon Shawn kind of guy. He's got some moxie to him. He's got some confidence. He seems like a competitor. And those are the kinds of guys that they like. But enough about kickers. We spent enough time about kickers. Let's talk about Fromm for a minute before we move on. Where do you guys land on this? Ryan and I have both, given our thoughts on the move. I think we're both, at least our interest is peaked to see where this is going to go. But I don't think that even in the long term, this is a move to protect against Josh Allen not working out.
Go ahead.
I totally. I mean, it's not first of all, I myself am not. I think that was the worst. My least favorite pick of the draft.
Right.
And it's not really from why'd you take a quarterback? It is really just comes from the player himself. I don't really. I wonder how far the slide was going to continue for Jake Fromm if it weren't for the Bills. I'm not convinced, as everyone else is, that the Bills pulled one over Bill Belichick. I'm not convinced that's the situation here. I think that Jake Fromm really struggles with arm strength. And I think when the ball gets wet, when it gets cold, by the way, he played in almost no cold games his entire college career. He's a Southern kid. Has almost never probably played in the conditions he's going to play here in Buffalo. And I know that's the most overrated and most maybe over talked about thing in Buffalo is, when you come here, you got to throw them through the conditions. If you've ever walked into that stadium, you know that at about 40 feet in the air, you got this swirling wind. And when you're a quarterback, and Josh Allen in 3 games in a row last year, home games, were swirling winds over 35 miles per hour in that stadium. I don't care who you are. If you can't hit an out route in that kind of weather, we saw what it did to the Eagles offense. The Eagles didn't throw 2 balls downfield that entire game. Now, of course, they ran all over the Bills, but I guess my point here is I don't love in this particular offense as it is. He's Matt Barkley, and I would say that for the people that are like, he's better than Barkley off the bus, I'm like, well, Barkley has seen NFL defenses, knows NFL defenses. Fromm is coming from an SEC team, and quite frankly, it's not like they were running a very complex offense. It was very easy. It was pretty dumbed down and simple from a passing concept standpoint. They lost a lot of their NFL talent at the receiver and playmaking position, obviously last year for Georgia. But I think for me, the biggest thing for Jake Fromm is I just don't think he has NFL arm strength. So if you don't have NFL arm strength, I think everybody goes back to and says the name Drew Brees. And it's like, okay, let's not compare just because he doesn't have a good arm. he's Drew Brees, because Drew Brees is the best anticipatory thrower of all time. He has been able to overcome that and play well into his 40s because he anticipates better than anyone in the league and probably for a very long time. Fromm does not have that level of anticipation. And in the NFL, you cannot be late on throws. 2 or 3 quarterbacks can be late on throws in the NFL. One of them is in here in Buffalo, Aaron Rodgers and, Patrick Mahomes. Those are the 3 guys that can afford in the NFL to be late by a half a second and still be able to complete a pass. Jake Fromm is not going to have that luxury in the NFL, and timing is everything. And with him, I just, I don't see it. So I think you could really love the pick. I'm not going to call you an idiot or dumb for it. I think, again, luxury pick. How mad could I really be about it? Because, again, this is a pick made in luxury. You picked competition for your backup quarterback in the 5th round.
Josh,
pick him from luxury.
And Josh, let me kind of add on to what Nate's saying. I think that this pick means that the Bills have to carry 3 quarterbacks on their 53-man roster, because realistically, shortened off season, you're not going to see Fromm be able to do enough to take over that job. But would you really be willing to risk putting him through waivers and letting another team pick him up that maybe had a high draft grade on him, but he was just never the highest player available on their board?
Yeah, I think that it could come down to this being a 55-man roster thing, right? I mean, if there are 2 extra roster spots, that's what we're hearing, that the CBA is going to add 2 roster spots and make it 55. Maybe the Bills believe that he ends up being one of those 55 and that they're not going to they can carry 3. Maybe all of a sudden they're going, we can carry 3 quarterbacks. I know one of the things was Jake, that Fromm's one of his knocks was small hands, right? As long as his hands are big enough to hold a clipboard, I'm good with it. Like, because at the end of the day, you draft Fromm not to ever play, quite frankly. You do. You draft him thinking that it doesn't matter because Josh Allen is going to be the starting quarterback for 8 more years. Now, Fromm is going to make $300,000, $400,000 this year, next year, the following year, and the following year.
So he can.
Matt Barkley is going to be more than that. Now, look, if they're after this year, Barkley, to me, something crazy would have to happen for Matt Barkley not to be the backup quarterback.
Correct.
For Josh Allen.
Correct.
That's what I believe. Now, next year, 2021 season, that could be what they've earmarked as, hey, if Fromm gets his rookie year under his belt and learns from Barkley and it's going to sound weird, learns how to be a backup quarterback. I mean, that's where the Bills are now.
Yeah.
Where it's, hey, Fromm, maybe they don't want him to learn from Josh Allen. Learn from Matt Barkley.
That's right.
Learn how to caddy for the starting quarterback.
One thing I do want to add to this is we're not talking about the competition between Matt Barkley and Jake Fromm. That does not exist, not in 2020. That competition does not exist. What we're talking about is Davis Webb versus Jake Fromm. That's the competition we're talking about, is who's going to be are you going to keep a 3rd quarterback? Because I'm going to tell you what, I like them keeping 5 defensive ends on the 53 or defensive tackles on this 53-man roster with Vernon Butler, and maybe 5 defensive ends. Maybe they're going to keep 9 defensive linemen on the game day roster. That means, where are you going to get those? So for me, the competition is between Davis Webb and Jake Fromm. And do I think that he has the capability of developing? Because that's something that I see being thrown out in the chat, of course. But what I'm talking about is not a developmental trait. I'm not saying he's slow to read defenses and he can learn that in the NFL. I'm saying he doesn't have the adequate arm strength to beat defenses consistently, because you do need a level. There is a floor. And I think it's really important for people to understand there is a floor for arm strength in the league. If you don't believe me, ask Matt Barkley or Matt Leinart, right? Like that's a guy who did not have the floor for NFL arm strength, and he was in and out of the league quicker than you could, snap your fingers. And I think that there is a level that if you don't have great arm strength, you still need to have average arm strength. You still need to be able to make all the throws. I think Jake Fromm comes in from the different. I mean, we're talking about a much narrower hash mark in the NFL compared to the college game. You can hide Jake Fromm's arm strength in college by throwing a ton of sideline routes to the short side of the field, which they did. You aren't going to be able to hide or protect Jake Fromm from NFL defenses when he gets in and is being asked to throw to the numbers from the opposite hash. That is a difficult throw to make in the NFL, and one I don't think he walks off the bus and is capable of making.
You can hide him behind that clipboard.
You certainly can. You certainly can.
Going real quick now into the fan commentary here in the chat. One person wants to know, does AJ Epineza make an immediate impact on the defensive line? Or do you think they will allow him to take the time to get familiar with their schemes behind a veteran?
Look, Ed Oliver went mid to high first round, and he didn't come in and have 15 sacks his rookie season. So if that's what you're looking for, and quite frankly, Ed Oliver, it took him half of a season to kind of figure things out. And then once he did, you saw his playing time shoot way up. His snap count went. You look at the first half of the season to the second half of the season, Ed Oliver's snap count just went like this. Well, if you're, tame the expectations a little on Epineza, because they've got veterans who can get the job done still. So I don't know that I'd expect him to go in and start racking up 2-3 sacks a game in the first four weeks of the season, because Ed Oliver didn't do it, and this guy's the 22nd pick in the second round. Quite frankly, and that was one of the things I asked one of the assistant coaches at Iowa. I said, because he didn't go in the first round, does that take a little bit of pressure off of him, right? That's the one thing with Ed Oliver. Ed Oliver came with some pressure, right? Because he was a first round guy. This guy's a second round guy. There's just different. That's apples to oranges as far as expectations go. And the guy from Iowa laughed and he goes, well, there's no one's going to put more expectations on AJ than himself anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
But with Ed too, I mean, that's a good point. But Ed also came in with a naivete, if you will, like very naive in terms of his mindset coming in. He said people told him right off the jump when he got drafted, you are going to get to the league and you're going to not be able to just win based on who you are and the gifts that you have. You're going to have to learn how to, it's a game of inches, technique wise, how to win your one-on-one matchups. And he was kind of like, man, I'll be good. I'll be good. I know how to do this thing. And he got here and he was like, man, how much time can I spend with Kyle Williams every day in practice at training camp? And so I think with Epineza, you're not going to have a guy that comes in with that kind of mentality. He's going to be a guy that comes in and be like, how much can I learn and how quickly can I learn it? And I'm not saying that Ed didn't have that, because Ed developed that really quickly. I think it was just, he was such an elite level player and a top 10 pick. It took him a few days in Pittsburgh to figure out that, oh, hey, I gotta focus a little bit more every day.
I think the interesting thing with Epineza, though, that I'm looking forward to is I've made this comparison, and I think why it's such a home run pick is, think about if you were to put the two guys up next to each other, Shaq Lawson and AJ Epineza. Shaq Lawson just got paid for his 2019 season $30 million to go play out of position in Miami. To play a position I don't think he's going to be successful playing is in that 5 technique 3-4 defensive end position. I don't think that is where he's going to go thrive. So I think AJ Epineza is going to look even better, because I think Shaq Lawson is going to take a step back this year. So just through relativity like that, I think people are going to look at it as, well, I think they got better at the left defensive end position. In my opinion, if you swap those two guys out just from a financial standpoint, I think you're going to get similar production, because I think AJ Epineza comes in and I think he's probably your best run edge defender right now. And he hasn't taken an NFL snap. I think that he provides the same skill set, the same quality skill set that Shaq Lawson brought, which is an edge setting. I don't ever think he's going to be a guy that turns into a double-digit sack guy. I don't think that's going to be him. Do I think he's going to – I think he could be an 8-9 sack guy at his maybe very peak or his ceiling. I think he's going to do a ton of winning inside too. Like, I think where he's going to do his most damage is on third down when they bump him down inside.
And Nate, they have 2 double-digit sack guys on the roster that I think people sometimes forget about some of the things that Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. I mean, it's not too hard to forget about what Mario's done. I mean, he's coming off of 4 straight years of at least 9 sacks. And the most interesting part about this defensive line, and Hughes in particular, coming off of a year where he played through that injury in his wrist all season long, that taped up going back to the preseason. When's the last time he played with the kind of caliber pass rusher as Mario Addison? I mean, you got to go back to Mario Williams.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, as long as he can fit, and I keep looking back at the scheme fit, we know that Sean McDermott in that defense needs one edge setting defensive end. Before AJ Epineza has entered this roster, that guy didn't exist. Like, that's not Trent Murphy's game. And that's what they asked Trent Murphy to do a lot of times last year when Shaq Lawson came off the field. And now I think you've upgraded. And now I wonder how Trent Murphy fits into all this, because I wonder how Quentin Jefferson fits into all this. He's a name that I don't think people were talking about enough. As a guy, I think that they're going to ask to be very versatile. He's a guy that can play the 7-tech, the 5-tech, and the 3-tech. That is a huge, to me, that's a huge versatility positive or net positive or whatever you want to call it. Like, to me, that's going to be really interesting to me, because if you say your left defensive end position is Quentin Jefferson and AJ Epinesa, well, I think you've got two edge setting run defenders that really kind of come in, and I think you can have an upgrade over what you had last year. The question is, where does he slot in? And are they going to keep 5 defensive ends, 5 defensive tackles? I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see how the roster plays out. But the defensive line, to me, is going to end up being such a cool storyline to see how it ends up playing out, because it could just go so many ways. Like, I was just trying to tinker with the lineup. You could get to like 7 or 8 different combinations of 4 guys across the board. Like, I think that's really cool. Like, there's not many teams that can say they can do that.
For sure.
Outside of, and you touched on this a little bit, Nate, we always hear position flexibility. I mean, how often do we hear Sean bring that up? And you look across that defensive line, and how many guys do you look? Maybe 3, Jerry, Trent, and Starr are 3 guys maybe that off the top of my head are going to be, exactly where they're going to play.
Mm-hmm.
When they're on the field, those are 3 guys. The rest of the guys, to me, like you said, you can slide. We saw Shaq slide down on the inside all the time. All the time. I could easily see AJ sliding down inside on 3rd down, on passing downs. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch how that, like you said, how they kind of piece that puzzle together. And quite frankly, that might be a week-to-week piecing of the puzzle together. I don't know that that's going to be a set, hey, the puzzle's done, here it is, week 1, and that's what they run out every week. That may be game plan specific. One week, there may be AJ Epinesa may be on the field for 65% of the snaps, and the next it may be 30. I mean, it may be game plan specific. And when you have a deep roster, and especially at that position along the defensive line, you can kind of toy with it and tinker with it a little bit, and it's going to be fun. It's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, so shifting gears, the Bills dipped into the wide receiver pool in round 4, picking up Gabriel Davis. So Davis obviously has a great shot at making the roster as a 4th-round pick, but what does that mean for the Duke Williamses, the Fosters, and the McKenzies of this roster? You obviously have your starting trio in place. Davis is coming on board. You have Andre Roberts as your kick return specialist. What about those guys that I just mentioned there, the Duke Williams, Robert Foster, and Isaiah McKenzie?
I love Hodgins, man. I really do. If
you flip-flopped Gabe Davis in the rounds, if you went in the 4th round, Isaiah Hodgins, I wouldn't have batted an eye.
100%.
Wouldn't have batted an eye.
100%. I was actually surprised the more.
So was I.
And then like, I liked him, but not that I knew a ton about him. And then I went and watched his film when they took him, and I'm like, this guy checks all the boxes that the Bills didn't have in a wide receiver. And they have a ton of guys that are talented, but a ton of guys that maybe specialize in X or Y or Z. And this guy is like 6'4", 210, doesn't drop a pass. Now, granted, he's not going to be Randy Moss and go blazing down the field, but I'd be interested to see if there's a spot in the slot eventually for him as that bigger body slot guy, because they already have the smaller guy with Cole. So it'll be kind of interesting to see. Talk about a position where you can move guys all around with all kinds of different, spots. But Isaiah McKenzie's another one. I know they just signed him to a new contract, but how's he going to fit in? If Gabe Davis, Hodgins, and the 3 that you just mentioned are going to make it, that's 5. Andre Roberts was a Pro Bowl return guy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 6. We're running out of spots pretty quickly.
I mean, McKenzie's best way onto this roster may be to do something in the preseason as a returner that makes Andre Roberts expendable. And even then, you go back to his first year in Buffalo, and even before that in Denver, and he's obviously had some fumbling issues over the course of his career. So how how secure do you feel in that? This is a all chips on the table season.
Well, I think it's interesting because Taiwan Jones is back. He's
Right.
here again. I think that if you went, and here's the thing, I think the really awesome thing, we keep talking about how Brandon Beane is just playing with house money, right? And at the end of the day, they are truly playing with house money when you're going out and finding competition for wide receiver 4, 5, and 6, because that's what they found. And I think for me, Gabe Davis was brought in to directly compete with Robert Foster for his roster position. That is that fight. I think that's going to be the fight between those two players. And because I think they're both going to have similar effects in specialties. I think those guys one of those guys are going to be your gunner. The other one's going to be Taiwan Jones. So is it going to be Robert Foster or Gabe Davis? I like Gabe Davis because I think they've used an asset on him. He's younger and he's developable. You can develop him at this point. The other one, I think Isaiah Hodgins was brought in to compete directly with Duke Williams. They're similar type players. They win the same way. Like that to me says those are the two matchups that I'm looking for. And the two.
Did you notice what Brandon said in his evaluation of Hodgins? I think he dropped 1 or 2 balls last year all season. And one of the big problems with Duke Williams, especially in that playoff game, was a big time drop. And then you move to directly after that game and Sean McDermott saying, we need to find players that Josh Allen can trust. So to your point, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think Hodgins is directly that competition for Duke.
And how it ends up working out in the return game, I think, is going to end up being where Isaiah McKenzie can create his value on the roster. I think that Andre Roberts' roster position is not as big of a lock as people make it out to be. And the only reason I say that is because he's going to be 33 years old this season. He's not a guy that is really running away from people. And he's not a guy that really ran crazy 40 numbers. Like he's just a good returner. He's an instinctual returner. I think if you can feel good about Isaiah McKenzie returning punts for you, that's how Isaiah McKenzie makes this roster. And the question is, and this is why I think Isaiah McKenzie might have the streamline to make the roster over Andre Roberts. You take Isaiah McKenzie off this roster. Who is the player right now off the bus that you think they're going to turn around and give those reverses, those shovel passes to? Because there isn't one. They didn't really address that. Antonio Gibson.
Lynn Bowden Jr.
I said I wanted,
but he's not on the team.
I wanted it to be Laviska Shenault, but he's not on the team either.
I was in Antonio Gibson, the kid from Memphis. I think the Raiders ended up picking him. That was the guy I was really, really pulling for. But they don't. That's the thing that I think is a sneaky reason why Isaiah McKenzie stays in this football team. And you say, okay, I mean, they manufactured touches for Isaiah McKenzie. There are very few players in that offense that they created touches for. Isaiah McKenzie was one of those players. He was getting 4 or 5 touches a game that in the playbook, they're saying this is Isaiah McKenzie's play. And if you tell me right now, I don't think they have a player that they have right now other than Isaiah McKenzie that is that type of role that we want to get the ball in his hands into open space.
And to be honest with you, I don't have his stats up right now, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but I do remember seeing a couple of highlights and run plays for Stephon Diggs. Now, whether or not that's the jet sweep type of run play, I don't know. This has to be when it comes out when you're coming off a wide receiver position. But you talk about a guy that you want the ball in his hands no matter what, right? I don't care, just get him the ball in his hands because he can make plays. I don't know if that's a way they can. No, you know what?
I really liked Isaiah McKenzie in 11 personnel when they had 3 wide receivers and they'd run out of 11, because I think the one thing with Isaiah McKenzie is everybody sort of looked at him on the field. They were like, okay, where's the shovel pass coming? And they used Isaiah McKenzie in a lot of situations as like a tendency breaker. Say, hey, when Isaiah McKenzie's on the field and lining up in the slot, is he going to, if they have that motion, the defense is paying attention whether or not he gets the football or not. And I think that part of that really it plays in his value. I think Isaiah McKenzie has more value than I think a lot of people might lead him on to have.
I think also Robert Foster, if he wants to, speaking of adding value, that's one area that I think that they started to use him with near the end of the season. The problem with Foster, though, is he always gets hurt, it seems. Like every time, whether it's a hamstring.
He makes a play and boom. Like, exactly. Like in the middle of the most amazing play of the season, he stubs his toe and he's out for 3 weeks. I know, I agree.
I mean, I stubbed my toe when you first got on the screen today and I saw that mustache because it is unbelievable. I kind of tripped over myself. But no, moving on, I want to talk about a couple more things. There's one more question I want to talk about in the chat. But one topic that I want to hit is a very interesting one that popped up today. The Bills signed to a 1-year deal. Brian Cox Jr. This will be his 4th year in the league, and obviously His father is the infamous Brian Cox from the Miami Dolphins, the Bills-Dolphins 90s era rivalry. Everybody that's a Bills fan or whose fathers or uncles were Bills fans knows who Brian Cox is. So just the dynamic of this right off the bat, I put out a couple things today, and the reaction to it was about what I expected. I mean, you know, there's obviously the level-headed fans that's like, I'm not going to blame a son for the actions of his father, but there's also a big collections of fans that said, hey, I can't wait till this guy gets cut.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, the first time he makes a big play for the Bills, people will be running out buying jerseys with Cox Jr. on the back, right? Let's face it. I mean, sure, I know Brian Cox is that his dad was that guy. But here's the thing. And I know that he was that guy a lot against the Bills because they played each other twice a year. But he was that guy, period. Right? I mean, he was just when we had a chance to Zoom with him, he even said, my dad played the part of the villain, and he thrived in it. And he knew his role, and it was something he relished. He embodied it. It juiced him up. Well, that's fine. I mean, there are always guys every decade that kind of are that guy that you just love to hate. You just love. 31 teams in the NFL hate the guy. One team in the NFL likes him. And
Who's the guy now? Who's the guy now? The first person that comes to mind maybe is Richard Sherman.
Oh, I was thinking Richie Incognito.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
I think it's Richard Sherman.
Yeah. Oh,
lest we forget Monday Night Football. How could we forget? Like, I'm going to say this. If we're just talking from a Bills fan's perspective, I don't think no one's going to forget what he did in that game. At the end of that game, was it Hauschka? Was Hauschka still the kicker at that time? Or was it Carpenter? It was Carpenter. It was Dan Carpenter when right at the end of the half, and then who did he push? Was it Robert Woods? Pushed Robert Woods out of bounds at the end of the game when Tyrod Taylor tried to make the like. To me, that game stood out as I hate Richard Sherman because he was like at the end of the game, everyone was grilling about. He's like, I know the rules, guys. You guys don't know the rules. I know that I can do that in that situation, and it seemed like a cheap shot, but really, he was playing within the rules. I think if you're a Bills fan, if you had to pick who your most hated player is in the league right now, I would think that it's got to be Richard Sherman.
And I think the reason I mentioned him too is because I think that goes across fan bases. I mean, I think there's a lot of teams, when he was in Seattle and now in San Francisco, I mean, there's high profile rivalries with both of those teams. And I think that, fans of the opposite team tend to dislike Richard Sherman a little bit, but Incognito's a little bit interesting too. I mean, he's got quite a nasty streak that's been on display over the years. I'm trying to think.
Walt Powell.
How about
Walt Powell? That's who it was. It was Walter Powell that got pushed out of bounds. Holy crap! I can't believe somebody came up with that. You're too big a Bills fan.
How about?
Oh, that's a great choice.
That's a great one. Yeah, he's so
Henry
good that he's
Anderson.
not even in the league right now. Yeah.
It's Henry Anderson.
Yeah,
that's definitely who it is. That's who they hate.
But here's the thing, though. Henry Anderson can't really count because I don't think that enough of casuals know who he is.
So Jarvis Landry's a good one. Jarvis
Landry's a great one.
Jarvis Landry is a good one.
Interesting.
I would say Odell Beckham Jr. is about as he really splits fan bases. I mean, not for a different reason, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he's not a cheap shot guy. He's not that. But for a different reason, you won't find many people that either really like Odell Beckham Jr. for the player he is, or they just think he's just a prima donna and isn't that good, quite frankly. So I'm trying to think of another guy who's been suspended, though.
Edelman is definitely that guy, right?
And what's funny is I know that Bills, I mean, if you talk about the last 10 years and talk about public enemy number one for Bills fans, I mean, Rob Gronkowski's in the conversation, but what's funny about that is it's really just one incident. I don't think that you can kind of take him and push him into the larger bucket. He's kind of a funny guy. Like, I went to Williamsville North, so I got a little bit of a soft spot for him, but I don't see him being that bad boy net. Like we're talking, and we also might be talking about, Josh mentioned you have one every era. We're in a different era. Let's be honest. I mean, that era was a nastiness that doesn't exist today. A lot of the reason for that is the rules that have changed, what you're able to do. I mean, back in the day, Brian Cox can go and kill Jim Kelly and he'd be perfectly within his rights because
let's put it this way, Parrino. I wasn't allowed at a Miami Dolphins home game until I was 16 years old because my dad would not allow me to go to Dolphins games from the scar tissue of the early 90s and late 80s when that was like he was like, nope, you're not. You can go to any game on the schedule. You are not allowed to do until a Dolphins game until you're 16 years old. And my first Dolphins game, I was like, this makes a lot of sense why I wasn't allowed here before 16.
If he finds a team, Antonio Brown is top 3 in the most hated players in the NFL.
Oh, easily.
Right?
100%.
Yeah.
And I think he'll find a team. I think he'll find a team.
And once again, he, much like you were talking about, he goes across, different fan bases. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Patriots fans don't like him because of what happened. Steelers fans don't like him because of what happened. Bills fans don't like him because of what they think happened. You know what I mean? There's a lot of fan bases who just do not like Antonio Brown.
Let's get to one more question here before we wrap up. If you're just joining us, thank you. However you found us, this is Bills Talk with Matt Parrino. My co-host is always Ryan Talbot. In the bottom, Josh Reed from Channel 4 and Nate Geary, the mustached superhero from WGR 550. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. And CB cornerback was a position that was talked about heavily before the draft. And the Bills went out and added Josh Norman early on before free agency, then brought in EJ Gaines after the fact. This particular fan wants to know, how can Dane Jackson come in and potentially make an initial impact with the competition that's in place there? Because I think the fact that they waited to the 7th round tells us what they think they have in Norman, Levi Wallace, and EJ Gaines.
Reed, take it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think his best shot might be in the slot. We were talking about guys who have struggled with injuries. Taron Johnson, he is solid, but that guy, and part of it is that quote unquote dog mentality, if you will. Like, he sticks his nose in there, and he is not a big guy. He is not afraid to get near the line of scrimmage and hit people. But man, every time, talk about the Robert Foster syndrome. Like, every time he makes a big play, it's, the grabbing of the shoulder, or, and you're going, oh man, this guy. You see flashes where you go, Taron Johnson can play. Like, this guy's a ball player. He's not afraid of anybody. Pound for pound, I would argue he might be one of the toughest guys on the team, pound for pound. But he just is always dinged. So maybe in the slot.
I agree with that. I think that's probably where his value comes in. I think that Levi Wallace is, I think, criminally just gets under-talked about. I think, again, although he was sort of playing a specialist role, him and Kevin Johnson coming on in specialty situations together, kind of creating a tandem cornerback too. When Levi Wallace was in the field, I thought he played good football last year. I think that they're looking at the Josh Norman situation probably a lot like they looked at the Kevin Johnson situation. I think that you'll see, at least initially, them give the benefit of the doubt to Josh Norman. I think I'm not in the camp that I'm expecting to see 2015 Josh Norman. I don't think anyone should assume that, but I do think you should see a better Josh Norman than you saw last season. I think he's going to have more confidence in the system. He knows he's played his best football in the system, and he knows what to do, what the calls are, and where to be in this system, which is really is the most important part of it. I think Jackson's best opportunity, again, to Josh's point, is in the slot. The question is, what do you have in Cyril Neal? And how much do you like him internally? Because I'm going to tell you what, the guy played outside corner and did not look out of place at times last year. That was the most surprising thing to me, is I thought for sure the guy was a box safety defender. He piqued my interest when he looked very, very good in the big nickel role. He sent me to another level when he looked not out of place on the outside of the corner position when they were forced to due to injury. That was a big eye opener for me. That was a big eye opener for me.
And doesn't Neal also have extra versatility in terms of probably being the MVP of the special teams unit last year?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think they like Dean Marlowe in that position too. Like, if those two guys are going to be your big nickel, why would you keep 4 nickel players? I'm not sure that they're going to do it. Jimmy Silguero would love that. But I think at the end of the day, they're probably not going to keep 4 guys to play in the slot position defensively. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. He's a 7th round pick. But we've seen 7th round picks come in here at the cornerback position. Nicole Roby-Coleman came in here and became a household name and is making money across the league. I think he was a 6th-rounder. But they've taken some of these late rounder corners and have gotten a lot out of them. So it'll be interesting. I think Bryce Hall turned into, who was the kid from Arizona State last year that fell, or Iowa State, the wide receiver, Hakeem Butler.
Oh, Butler.
Hakeem Butler. I remember from the 3rd round until the 7th, I just remember everyone saying, Hakeem Butler, why does everyone keep overlooking it? That was Bryce Hall in this draft. I thought that Bryce Hall, from the 3rd round on, I'm thinking to myself, why haven't the Bills taken him? Why aren't the Bills taken him? Everyone was like, and the 4th round pick, where Gabe Davis went. Everyone's like, oh, well, Bryce Hall here. That's where he's coming off the board. The Bills here in the 4th round, and they took Gabe Davis. And so then you really started to think, man, I think they think more about their corner room than people on the outside. And if we've known anything about this team, this organization, they've got a pretty good feel. They got their thumb on this roster. If they feel good about corner, we should probably just agree and take their word for it.
Okay, one more question from the chat. Is there any undrafted free agent that you could see making this roster?
Trey.
Yes. No. That's
No?
not, I'm going Gilliam.
You're going Gilliam. Okay. I'm going to go Trey Adams.
I'm going to go Gilliam over DeMarco. And I know they love DeMarco, and I know they love his special team ability, but Gilliam, just so happened a guy I went to high school with, I'm good buddies with, is the head coach at Toledo, Jason Candle. So as soon as they signed, I heard a rumor that they were going to get Gilliam. So then I called Candle, and we kind of chatted a little bit about him. This kid had 6 block kicks. 6 blocks. Like that. You talk about a special team stud. They were like, and he said, look, the kid's got really good hands. This kid will run through a brick wall. And he was like, and you're getting a rookie that, he hasn't gotten paid, so he'll continue to run through that brick wall.
So if you lose, let me just bump in here because I like what you're saying, and we talked about this a little bit last night. But let me ask, everybody in here, you lose Lorenzo Alexander. In this scenario, you lose Patrick DeMarco. Who steps into those roles in the room?
If you're losing Patrick DeMarco?
Yes.
Lee Smith?
I think you're losing Lee Smith too.
Yeah.
While we're at it.
Look, here's the thing. You're talking from a leadership standpoint. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Tremaine Edmonds, continues to step up as a leader, and I think he's only going to get more of that role next year. This is Josh Allen's team. Look, he's the quarterback. And quite frankly, I think he does a good job of being a leader. I think they rally behind him. I think they look at him as their guy. And I'm going to tell you what, that goes back to pretty much day one. And he'll forever in his career, if he continues to make strides, he'll forever in his career be a little indebted to LaShawn McCoy, because LaShawn was one of the first people that came out and said at a podium, Josh Allen is that guy. Like, this is our leader. Like, he is a dog. Like, this guy is the guy. Like, he's going to get us where we got to go. And it's Josh Allen's team. It's a quarterback league.
Let me reset Let me reset this a little bit. What I mean is, you go back to what Sean McDermott says about getting the message across in his room. And on the field, I agree with you. In the locker room, to an extent, I agree with you. Josh Allen and Tremaine, this is their team. But they are both responsible for a lot of what's happening on both sides of the ball. So I'm talking about those guys that bring other guys along. Josh Allen's got to worry about himself. Josh Allen's got to worry about being the quarterback, the face of a franchise. He's not going to spend time working with, 43 through 53 on the roster and bringing them along and making sure that they get the message. So I'm talking about those guys that know the program, those veterans that are going to really set the tone and the message in the room. And if you think that those two guys are ready to have those roles, then I believe you, because you know what? You have a sexy head of hair. I'm talking to Josh, Nate. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I know that wasn't my cue. Don't worry. I will raise you an interesting name to this room, and why I think he was signed in the first place is AJ Klein. I think that's an interesting name if you want to toss in there as sort of a leadership council type of guy. I think he's going to end up likely wearing the C. He's an interesting name to me. I think that's probably why you bring him in. Is to help with some of the youth at the linebacker position. The undrafted free agent question, though, the reason I'm thinking Trey Adams, by the way, Trey Adams in last year's Matt Miller's too early after the 2019 draft, the 2020, this was a guy that was listed as a potential first-round pick going into last season. Injuries derailed his career at Washington. But if you want to talk about the definition of like big ugly, like there's the big uglies up front, like he is 6'8", 330 pounds of just ugly man. And like, that's the kind of guy that I want on my offensive line all day.
The one quarter of this chat right now is the definition of ugly man too, because I cannot stop looking at that mustache. I'm just busting you, man. I just want to listen. Your girlfriend walked into the room and turned the lights on, and it shined the light on that stash. It was so beautiful and so perfect. So
yeah,
it started to run. It started to scurry.
It's like, it's 8:00. My mustache is leaving the chat. So
there it is. All right, guys, this was a great time. We are at an hour. This has been so much fun. Nate Geary, WGR 550. Follow him on all the social media platforms. He's a great guy, great follow. Josh Reed, bottom left, sports director of Channel 4, my man. Always have fun when we get a chance to talk to you. And for Ryan Talbot, I am Matt Parrino. This has been Bills Talk with Matt Parrino and Ryan Talbot. Find it on all of your podcast applications. We're on Apple, Stitcher, Google, Spotify, everything. Subscribe, and we really appreciate your support. Guys, have a great night. And keep it locked onto NY Up and Syracuse.com for all your Bills content.